All right, well, thanks for coming. I want to highlight various strategies that we're working on at the research farm where I live in the Mad River Valley, all focused on food systems resiliency, creating durable food systems that can be adaptive in the face of shifting conditions. Kind of want to start with the understanding that the only thing that's guaranteed is that the conditions in which we're growing food, producing food, attempting to make a living on this planet, the only given is that those conditions are shifting. I won't get into real detail about what the shifts are, but that's important to some extent, but really what we know as a baseline and our starting point in our work and ending point really is simply that change is happening. It's always happened. It might be happening more rapidly right now than we've seen in human history, but it's not happening any more rapidly than it has in the relatively recent past of the planet. So I just want to kind of start with that sense of things. That change is what's guaranteed. The rate of change is not guaranteed. We have to be adaptive, resilient in the face of that change. If we want to really stay here, if we really want a food system at all, it'll have to be highly resilient. So there's going to be less and less of a middle ground probably as we go forward, because the tolerances of making a living on this planet are, unfortunately, we're in a time where they're going down. It's getting more difficult. Deserts are expanding in the world. The climate's shifting in ways that I'm sure everyone is somewhat aware of. The Earth is largely very habitable, but it's more or less depending on where you are on the planet. We're lucky to live in a place that's actually, I would argue, is about the most habitable part of this whole sphere. That you could, if you threw a dot, you just like jump, tried to land here from space. Depending on where you landed, I think you would half the time land in a desert or an area that is quickly becoming desert. And in an oversimplified map, this says other land, that's desert, right? That's really what this brown color is. And Antarctica included. Antarctica is the biggest desert in the world. It's just covered with ice. But it's very dry. And we happen to live in one area in the northeastern part of the continent that's actually part of contiguous forest. And it's forest that's coming back. And it's actually a very different forest, as we know, from tropical forests, which are not nearly resilient to the extent that these forests are. And I'll get at why, because it's very important. If we want to create a resilient food system, we want to ask the question, well, what is resilient about the place we already live in? What is resilient about Vermont's ecosystems? And how do we leverage those tendencies towards resiliency, wherever we find them, to create even more resiliency? So we have a food system that essentially leverages the best tendencies of our ecosystem to be resilient. And when I say be resilient, it's really a few specific things. It's capture and store water. It's accumulate biological wealth and biodiversity, biomass and biodiversity. Those two, of course, are very related. So we want to promote those tendencies. Luckily, right now, the way climate seems to be shifting, there's no guarantees here, but what we're seeing so far is that we actually might be becoming wetter. This part of the world might be getting wetter, actually, on an annual basis. If you take, this is a great test, and anyone who's neglected to put a bucket away on their property has seen this, and hopefully learned something, one of the most important things we can learn about this part of the world, which is what happens if you leave a bucket out in your landscape in this part of the world. Fills up. Most of the year, pretty much, it fills up, right? So this year, this bucket, which I left next to my compost pile in a pretty sunny spot, filled up starting in the spring, and then it started to go down probably in late June into July, just an inch or two. And then starting in mid-August when we started to get rains again, it started to go up. Of course, it overflowed when we got 6 inches at my place in the tropical storm Irene, and it's been overflowing ever since. So it will be overflowing 9 to 10, 11 months of the year. Now, most of the world, a bucket will empty, fill, empty, fill. And an increasingly amount of the world, the bucket will empty if you start it full. And then a wind will come up and blow the bucket away, or a goat will walk by and kick the bucket away, and there won't be any more bucket with which to capture water. So we're really lucky because we're in one of the only parts of the world, and an increasingly small part of the world, small amount of surface area, that's actually net positive. Our equation, our water budget is net positive. And that's becoming a rarity on this planet, unfortunately. So we have to figure out our systems. They're going to be functioning well if they figure out how to not just deal with that amount of water, but actually use it as an advantage. And right now, we do not yet really know how to farm this abundance of water we have in the landscape. We're just starting to realize what it means, and we're at the beginning stages, I think, of understanding how do we actually take advantage of this water, and then the biological wealth accruing that this water allows. So this is yesterday, I took a walk out in the rain to kind of get a real sense of the existing conditions as we're in this swing season to contextualize this talk. And I want to just kind of step outside virtually for a moment and look around at Vermont's landscape through this walk that I did yesterday to bring up some of the context that's important for understanding resiliency. So we're in the northern forest, right? This time of year, the forest does what it does. Fortunately, every year, all the biomass that was built up during the growing season, all the energy that came in was put in the form of leaves and, growth of trees, and it's all falling, a lot of it's falling back down. This ecosystem is mulching itself right now, constantly building soil, holding ever more moisture in. The only thing that holds more water, it holds water better than good soil, is what? It's an amazing thing, and we have more than anything, it's like kind of our most common material in this landscape. What holds water better than soil? Trees, wood. That's the only thing. That's the best sponge. So we have this landscape just covered, littered in biological debris, and it wants to be forest, and it becomes forest very quickly, even if we don't plant trees, right? If this town road, Class 4 town road, was abandoned, you'd have poplar and birch coming up in here in this seedbed that's being created right now. Inside of 5-10 years, you'd start to not recognize it as a road after 50 to 100 years, unless you were experienced in doing that. And so not only do we have this accretion of biological wealth, biodiversity and biomass, due to our moisture and the seasonal cycles, but the aspect of the seasonal cycle that's big is the dormancy cycle. So everything freezes up and stands still to some extent and starts decomposing and has time to settle. Biomass has time to settle for almost a third of the year. And that's how we end up with a soil-building climate, right? This is how we end up with most of Vermont looks like something like this, most of New England, covered in biological material, woody debris. If we were in a warmer spot, warmer part of the world that's always growing, like the tropics, you have very thin soils because all the biomass is up in the upper layers most of the time. It's constantly being burned off by the growing season. So we actually have a perfect situation here in terms of accruing biological wealth if we use it carefully. Now we haven't, and it shows you how tolerant our climate is. This is Vermont 150 years ago. 200 years ago, most of Vermont would look like this, right? When we started clearing this landscape, we cleared over 80% of Vermont during our first attempt at settling the place. It didn't work very well, as we know. A lot of those folks had to leave when we lost the bulk of our topsoil after the sheep craze and the great clearing that happened in the 1800s. When we were not only clearing to settle the place, it was our gold rush, our timber rush. We were selling off all the logs. This is the White River. That's the White River Valley. That's probably Route 12 was built somewhere in there later. So, for the most part, everything was cleared except the most difficult to reach areas in the state. And, incredibly, no one really came through and replanted. There's a few plantations here and there, but for the most part, no trees were replanted, and there's a forest again. It's a compromised forest, but there's a mantle of a biological buffer covering this place, growing even on bare rock, right? Here's hemlock and yellow birch. They'll grow in this climate out of rock, essentially, because we have such an even distribution of moisture. Now, most of the world, if you deforest, you create desert, right? Deforestation and desertification go hand in hand on most of the planet. The tolerances of the planet aren't that wide like they are here. If you take down your trees, this is what you end up with, rock. You end up with a difficult place to make a living. And we know what happens in those places. We get a lot of conflict. The most fertile places in the world were not desert until very recently, really, when you look into it. Fertile Crescent was the Fertile Crescent, right? Tigris and Euphrates. Now it's a desert. Now it's one of the most unstable places in the world. But we've done that. That's anthropogenic. We've done that in a very short period of time. So we live in, again, this is just important context. We live in the opposite type of climate as this. We live in the most buffered part of the world you can really live in. There's one area of fertility left, for the most part, and this is at the expense of silts and all the soil loss in the upper Nile basin, right? Moving northward to keep this area looking green. It's really green on my screen. It's pretty green here too. That's just a zoom in of it, because that is just phenomenal. And you can see the loss. You can see the entropy in the system, right? There's all the soil after it's moved through into the Mediterranean, where we probably won't get it back. So we lose soil the same way here, but it goes into Lake Champlain instead of the Mediterranean. So in our work in approaching what is a resilient system, what are strategies for developing resiliency, I've traveled to different parts of the world to see similar climates, similar latitudes, similar land uses, similar places that do tend to accrue biological wealth, to see what they've done, to see how they've inhabited these places for long periods of time. Because we really just got here in the big picture of things. We got here 200-300 years ago. We attempted some very simplistic forms of agriculture. They didn't work. And then we got cheap energy, so we didn't need agriculture. And now we're at the beginning of needing to resettle our place. So what do we know? We don't know much yet, so we have to look around the world to see. Anyone know where this is? Any guesses? It's actually a very similar climate to here, though it's really Arctic in nature.
That's New Zealand. Like this was
It's almost, this could be parts of New Zealand. It's a little bit of a trick question. The next slide's in New Zealand. This is Iceland, though. But it looks like southern New Zealand, the South Island. Yeah. So it's a little bit colder. They tend to still keep their snow a little more. They keep a little more moisture than a lot of New Zealand is keeping. But it's very interesting, because you look at this and you see an area that looks really lush and green, but you start looking up on the slopes and realize, wow, that used to be all green too. Right? We've lost soil. This is where soil loss is occurring in this photo. This is where there's some deposition, right? Because all of this is what's the predominant land use? Same as in New Zealand. Sheep, right? And we know what that's like here. We've done that. We've been there, done that. We don't have as much slope to deal with, but we have a lot of steep slopes as well. So look at all this erosion. You don't hear about Iceland as a place of erosion, but this is what is happening right now in the world. It's been sheeped heavily, and all this gullying and ditching where the grade gets significant. So we're losing the ability to produce on the slopes, just like we did in Vermont. And we've, captured some of the soil down low, but even these bottomlands look pretty barren. Productivity of these bottomlands is pretty low. In a place that has plenty of moisture. If we go to the totally opposite hemisphere, but to a latitude that's the exact same as Vermont, and go to the north part of the South Island of New Zealand and the south part of the North Island of New Zealand, this is what it looks like. This is on the way into Nelson in the north part of the South Island. Pretty heavy stocking density of animals, right? That could be fantastic for soil building if they're rotated. Unfortunately, in a lot of the world, and certainly in New Zealand, there's not a lot of intensive rotational grazing going on. There's some in certain areas. But I was amazed. I went to New Zealand thinking I would see this highly sophisticated pasturing system going on. I was in for a real surprise. They're still clear-cutting large areas of forest, especially in the northern part of the South Island. And it's interesting because it's not on that map that I showed in the beginning of desert and the other land, which is all arid land, and then forest. I don't think New Zealand is in the other land. It's considered forested and not becoming desertified. But that was the biggest thing I realized in the first week of being there, is actually New Zealand, in parts of New Zealand, is becoming a desert. There is desertification happening, even in what have been moist areas of the world. And folks who are working in watershed management in the South Island know this. This is the spring in New Zealand, so this is really the end of the wettest time of year. This is a creek that drains thousands of acres. The dry season hasn't really started yet in this photo, but it's totally dry. And that's because the forest is being cut down for grazing, right? So if you cut the reason, all of this resiliency goes back to water through forests. That's one simplified way to look at it. We lose our forests, we lose our water. We lose our forests, we lose our soil. We lose our water, we lose our soil. Or we make them unstable, we lose our food system. We lose our resiliency of our food system, especially. And eventually our food system as a whole. But we don't have to do it that way. So that's important context, and now I want to zoom to some strategies that people have figured out throughout the world. This is also in the north part of the South Island. Very sophisticated way of performing agriculture, right? A highly diverse mix. In a system like this, we're slowing the wind down, no silts moving, we're slowing the water down, working across contour, so water moving through this landscape is slowed, is infiltrated, and there's a lot of biological production. This is actually a commercial farm. Looks like a major scale permaculture to me, but that's just a set of commercial farms outside of Nelson, the north side of South Island of New Zealand. We have examples of forest gardening, essentially, all over the world, where people have existed and performed quote-unquote agriculture. It's hard to call this agriculture, but it's a food system nonetheless. Based in nut-producing, mass-producing trees that yield a lot of fat, carbohydrates, and protein that don't need soil disturbance to function. They don't need fertilizer to function. So these are fantastic examples. There's examples from Europe where people have learned, simply by necessity, to farm places that are incredibly marginal, make Vermont look like all ag land, even though only 10% of our state actually is ag land. When you figure out how to farm 150% great, slope of rock in perennial crops, then yeah, you think it's pretty easy in this part of the world. So the strategies that people have developed.
What kind of trees were those?
I am not sure. This is in Spain, and I know it's adjacent to a bunch of vineyards, but I don't think it's grapes. I think these are a different form of perennial cropping. But there's a lot of examples of this all over, especially in the arid areas around the Mediterranean.
This could be kiwis.
Kiwis, yeah? Interesting.
There are a lot of kiwis.
Okay, fun. Even in the Mediterranean area, yeah. So people have seen photos like this from all over the world, right? Where agriculture has been performed not just for 100 years or 50 years, like we've done it here, but for thousands. If it's sloping, this is what the lands tend to look like. If we're going to perform like an annual agriculture, right? Because it's the only way that human beings have managed to figure out how to keep their soil where they need their soil, which is up on the slopes. Because gravity's the one thing, it's like rust, right? It never sleeps. Gravity's the constant force pulling all of the best material, the silts, down into the rivers, ultimately in the oceans. Geologists call that mass wasting. I love that term because it is wasting. We want to basically keep all of that up on the slopes. That's the success of human societies, is essentially the extent to which we can keep biology from washing away. So terracing has been a fantastic strategy for doing that. And we see these systems and we're like pretty amazed, but at least for me, for about 6 years, I didn't realize that, Vermont could look like this too. Until we started making terraces like this. And now, I'll show you some photos of our site in a few minutes. I've come to a point which shouldn't be very surprising. It's more of like a duh moment. Like, yes, when people have figured out how to inhabit hilly landscapes, this is what you end up doing. But we don't have references for this in this part of the world, because we just haven't been here for very long. I think we just haven't been here a long time, and then we didn't need agriculture for the last generation and a half of people. So if we do plan to stay here, if we intend to stay, and we intend to have food, and have it in a resilient way, we start to look at systems in similar climates where people have had food for thousands of years coming out of their landscape. This is actually in northern Japan. Can everyone see the rice? You guys see baby rice plants in here. 10,000, 20,000 pounds of rice you can produce in that amount of paddies. You get 5,000 pounds an acre from rice. Twice what you can get out of terrestrial grain. This is also in northern Japan. So all this has been made by hand. People figured it was worth it. After thousands of years of settling a place, they decided, yes, it's worth it to spend a generation digging so that the next 50 or 100 generations or more can actually live there and do it in an agricultural type of way. Now, so there's a lot of examples of this from warm climates of the world, but the interesting thing, and for me has been an epiphany, is that when I saw a photo of terraces like this with snow covering them, that's kind of when it occurred to me that, oh, of course we can do this in Vermont. We just aren't trying. This is very far northern Japan. This is actually Hokkaido, I think, where they get at least as much snow and basically as cold of a climate as we are here. So we've kind of zoomed back. We've been at the 30, 50,000 foot level, right, to understand where we are in the world and what people have been doing and how landscapes are behaving. we all of a sudden zoom over to Vermont, we say, okay, what's here? What do we do? Where's our food grown? And we see very quickly, well, it's all grown in a tiny sliver of the landscape called the river bottoms. Right? Floodplains is where basically our food system exists. It hasn't always been the case, but we have not yet really learned how to farm the hillsides, which is 90% of our landscape, is our hills. The river bottoms where the best soil is, because it's where it's all washed down to over thousands of years, and it's where we've had these fertilizing events from the rivers flooding. But as we know now, better than we have in a little while, probably since 1927 maybe, we're starting to understand that these places actually are very precarious places to try to grow food. Because our landscape's shunting all of its water constantly, and we get a lot of it flowing off our hillsides. It all ends up in the rivers. So we turn 6 inches of rain, call it 6 to 10 inches of rain in Tropical Storm Irene. We turn this much rain into 15 feet, 20 feet, 25-foot depths. That's how deep the Mad River, for instance. That's how much the river rose. So we turn 6 inches into 30 because we're isolating, we're concentrating those water flows in the landscape. Not a good idea, but some of that's going to happen no matter what we do. The strategies that I'll get at is all about slowing that water flow down, infiltrating that water, reducing, taking 6 inches and maybe we turn it into 5 feet of depth or 10 feet of rise in river. The less, the better. The more we even out the bumps, the amplitude of an event, the better. The more we can cope with those events. So this is yesterday, and this is really interesting. I took a photo of this ditch, this road ditch. This is where the destruction starts. And it's important to remember that because I was in an interesting conversation with someone the other day, so kind of tracing the cause of destruction of Tropical Storm Irene. And, we really asked the question, well, where did the destruction start? It wasn't as big of a storm as it was supposed to be. Did it start with this storm? Was the storm what destroyed so much in Vermont? Or was it how we dealt with the storm? Was it how our infrastructure coped with that amount of water, which actually isn't that much water, 6 to 10 inches. A lot of the world gets 6 to 10 inches 4 or 5 times a year without losing big pieces of its infrastructure. So it's interesting, and I would pose that actually the first place that water droplets ran into a ditch as they made their way from the high elevations down slope, that's where the water started to destroy. The water flowing as Mendon and the heights of Pico and Killington started to get 5 inches, 6, 8 inches of rain. That water's running clear over most forested landscapes, relatively undisturbed landscapes in Vermont, until it hits the first ditch. And in the Killington area and central Vermont, those ditches are pretty high, right? Because there's roads up ski mountains and there's developments next to ski mountains. I'll leave that. That's a whole other conversation, but it's not being talked about very much. But the extent to which roads are stitched through our landscape and what that does to our watershed and how all of a sudden sheet flows turn into concentrated flows loaded with silt is probably more than we might imagine. This is half an hour later. Same ditch. I was walking uphill towards the waterfall I wanted to see and see if the stream that I know of was running clear or not in just essentially 1.5 inches of rain, because that's a great barometer, is when do our rivers and streams start to move silt. The longer they take, the more inches of rain they take to start moving silt, the better, the more resilient our whole system is. These don't take very long, unfortunately, because we have a lot of poorly done ditches in the town I live in. So this is, let's say, at noon, and, going the wrong way, 40 minutes later, look at all the silt being moved, the ditch is rising, the waters are rising in the ditch, and this is going straight to the Mad River, this is going straight to the Lake Champlain. All this silt, every particle of all the trillions and upon trillions of particles that this little ditch on the Moortown Common Road is picking up is on its way to Lake Champlain. There's nothing that's going to stop that in our current infrastructure. So we're just losing. This is a losing type of situation. Here's the water running across the culvert into the next area. So this is its path, right? And during a big storm event like in Irene, this is what we start to see happen. Streams become rivers, start jumping their channels even in forested systems. Small streams become major streams. This is in Stowe on Sunday evening during Irene. And then significant rivers like the Mad River become Himalayan in scale to some extent. And we're moving billions of tons of biological value from our mountains to Lake Champlain in a matter of hours. So if you think this is, and you may think, well, what's this have to do with food systems? But it is the foundation of our food systems. How water moves through our landscape is at the root of all this, because this is our soil. And not only is it our soil, it's our water. And water is loaded with fertility. It's loaded with nitrogen. It's loaded with micronutrients, macronutrients, oxygen. So we want to keep as much of this in our mountains as possible. And the strategies that I'll get at highlight some of those strategies. I just want to hit on Irene a little more. The river here kept going straight. This is in Waitsfield Village, right? Too much energy to stay in its channel. It needs to access the floodplains. So this is where we grow most of our food. As I say, our food system is in our river bottoms, where all of this water from 90% of the landscape goes to 5 or 10% of the landscape. And so most of our food comes from places like the Inner Vale and Burlington. We're starting to realize that's a precarious situation. We start to ask the question, how do we grow on our hillsides? Because we can grow some annuals, and maybe on a nice year we'll get a good crop. Maybe things are shifting. Maybe we'll get flooded in certain places like the Inner Vale on a yearly basis. No one knows. That's a bet. That's a betting game. At best, we win some of the bets. The odds of the game are probably getting worse with what's happening globally. But we look at this and we say, well, not only is this not a fertilizing event like it used to be, it's a toxifying event. Because this used to be how these river bottoms soils get better and better every year. Even at some compromise. We may lose a crop, but we're getting our fertility. Now, obviously, there's propane, diesel, and gas, and sewage treatment plants, and everything else that was in the watershed that's been washed away, settling out onto these pieces of land. So the toxicity of our food system starts going up as a result. On that gamble, just showing 2 photos here of, anyone know where this is? Too many? Yeah, this is Canada. So if our climate has always been relatively unstable, I mean, that's kind of just what climates do is they shift. Climates change with or without us. We're helping them go a lot faster, right? So the gamble of that photo of river bottom agriculture, the gamble that is river bottom agriculture is getting worse, as we know. So this is just in 16 years. But like the tar sands photo shows, I think this is really, we should think of this as a precursor to real change. Because we just starting to get going, right? I like to think of the oil age that we're entering now as part 2 of the oil age. The first part was the clean part of the oil age. That's when it was liquid in the ground. We didn't have to try to squeeze liquid from rock via coal. That's what we're doing now, and fracking in the second part of the oil age. So the climate cost is much higher. Kudos to the work of what Bill and everyone is doing at 350. But we need a backup plan that says, well, if we need to get here, we need to be here. Needs a tough word. We may not get there. If we don't change course, you get where you're going. So where are we going? We're going with China, India, and tar sands to call it 900 parts a million. I don't know. Something that we may need to figure out. Well, we better. Some folks would say, well, we can't live. We can't live in this amount of parts per million of carbon dioxide, and we won't be able to figure it out. Well, we may have to. So let's try. We should also try to reduce the curve, of course, and that's what a lot of great people are working on. But what if we don't get there? What's our backup plan? So we need to grow in the hills. We need to grow in a resilient way. This is what hillside farming looks like in Vermont today, a lot of it, right? It's pretty much it's been sold and it's still for sale. And it's not selling quickly. This is a farm down the road from me. This is some of the best soil in the Mad River Valley. The site where this house is. So we live on a farm. We live on a beat-up old hill farm. It's like most of Vermont. It's a great place to try to do this. It's not good soil. We've lost 10 to 14 inches of silty loam. That's what the soil maps say for the 10 acres that I live on. There's between 0 and an inch of silt on the landscape I live in. All that's been lost. So it's a great place to re-inhabit this part of the world and try to figure out how to do it. This is kind of from the top of my house looking down at the landscape. And you can start to see what this landscape is looking like in an overview form. I'll point some things out because it's a little bit hard to see. But anyone see these mounds in here? Yeah. Those are on-contour swale mounds that continue in here. This is all on-contour swale in here. We're continuing on-contour swales through this area that was white pine forest. And then obviously you can see the ponds, rice paddies, more ponds, and terraces and swales going down in the field. This is an overview, but I'll zoom into each of these aspects and talk about what we're farming via these these landforms and how. So we're taking the approach that the water on this site, and this we just been forced into organically. When I moved to this property, I didn't think to myself, oh, I'm going to start making ponds and terraces and paddies and swales. But as we started to realize what was going on with our soil and water as a basis, we realized that, well, I went to plant an orchard, and a small orchard, and I dug some holes, came back the next day with the trees, and the little holes were filled with water. And this is like in the beginning of the growing season. And realized very quickly, well, that's not a good situation for most plants that we eat. But a big hole filled with water is actually really useful. That's a pond. We can grow fish in ponds. We can grow wetland edge plants. We can make basins and make paddies. So we've been an attempt to adapt to these conditions for 8 years now. I've been on the site. And the site is starting to look like agricultural systems in other parts of the world where water is being captured. So I'll zoom into some. This is just a quick overview. I'm going to zoom into the systems themselves here in a moment through a schematic that shows, because I know some folks may understand this, but it's maybe not clear to everyone. Well, what's going on? Why are you making all of these earth shapes? What are they actually doing? And it's easier to show this through drawing. So if you think of a typical slope, let's say this is 15% grade, a very typical hillside in Vermont. Most of the water, and I didn't realize until working with the landscape I lived on for about 6 to 7 years, that most of the water is actually moving off the slope. It's not infiltrating. It's just traveling downhill, going right into the rivers. That's why our rivers rise so quickly in a storm. So we need to change that situation, as we've talked about. We want that water in the soil. We don't want it to rush into the rivers because we're not getting value out of it, and it's destroying our watersheds when we allow that. So we need to do something structurally to avoid this flow of water. Now that, in short, is on-contour work. That's what permaculturists mean when they say work on contour. That can be with woody debris in a very primitive way, and for parts of the world, for thousands of years, people have practiced literally laying down woody debris, stumps and branches and anything you could come up with, and putting it on contour and then planting above those lines of debris to slow that water down. Eventually you make landforms. For us, we have access to heavy equipment. It's cheap. It's easy right now. We can actually change the slope of the earth very quickly and then start adding biological material. So that's what we tend to do with swales. And swales, you can think of swales as like a poor man's patio or terrace. In some ways, it's more powerful than a terrace, because a terrace will lose water over time, and swales will capture it all. So if you make swales across contour, this is what happens when the water hits it. Right? Say you have X amount of water, say you have 10,000 gallons of water moving down this slope. After this swale, on the surface, maybe you have 1,000, 2,000. It all depends on your soil type, the angle, how much water you actually got. But a vast majority of that water stops when it hits these swales and it's forced to infiltrate, even on very poor soils. And as you go down the slope, continuing with swales, you're infiltrating more and more water. There's less and less water moving across the slope. I know this is terribly basic, and I'm sorry to have to hit on it, but it's so basic we've missed it. We don't work with our landscapes this way for the most part. When we do, the results are incredible, and I'll show you some photos from the property. We're finding that a tree planted in a flat area grows at about half the rate or less than a tree planted on a mound, all things being equal. And then the fact that you're catching the water and fertility is just a bonus beyond that. But just the idea of planting on mounds in itself is powerful, because you're actually getting more surface area. There's more soil to air interface, and that's where all the biology is, right? In the soil, it's not 4 feet down, it's all at the surface. You're creating more surface. As someone who was touring the land said a couple years ago, it's like, well, you're actually kind of making more land when you do this. Your site, you're making more land in a figurative way. And if you think about it, no, you're actually literally making more land. If you take a flat piece of land or a slope piece of land that does no swales, and you swale it up and then stretch it out, you've increased your acreage because there's more surface area. So you are making more land. We tend to think of the amount of land we have available as constant, but it's actually not with Earthworks. And then we start stacking functions, right, which is a permaculture jargon for introducing many layers, biological layers, of working these systems to increase their resilience and their yields, their biodiversity and their biomass, those things being really the two best metrics we have to work with. Most farming is only concerned with biomass, but of course if we want farming to last, we need to be concerned with the biodiversity too, the health of the system. So then we start grazing these systems. And this is what's happening on about 2 acres of our property, and it's just easier to see through drawings than photos, because it's all just a green wall when you take photos of it. This is that system. You can see just after a rainstorm 2 summers ago, this is the swales doing their job, holding the water. And all this stuff is so easy to see in person, but it's very hard to see via two-dimensional slide. These are all Siberian seaberry planted on the mounds here, which is a nitrogen-fixing plant, which I'll touch on briefly. But
What, did you say that again? They're what?
Siberian seaberry. They're a nitrogen-fixing fruit,
Vermont
essentially.
citrus.
Vermont citrus, exactly. If people have been using that term, I like it. It's really what they are. So now, this is a year later, right? Look at you can see right through these swales. Actually, so this is 2 years ago. This is right after planting. Looking the opposite direction now, 2 years later. That's this slope. I mean, so the seaberries, were down in here in that photo. And now they're walls, they're alleys of biomass. They're mulching themselves. We're increasing the biological accumulation across the contour. So swales are being formed even just on its own accord. And of course, the soil health is going up. And then we start pruning these plants, so roots start dying back, so then we're really starting to build soil quickly. Because the roots die back, that's organic matter, that's carbon in the soil. That's the whole process that we're trying to promote as human beings if we want to put the carbon back in the ground where it belongs. When you cut a plant, so say you cut a plant heavily, some of the roots die back to compensate, and that is really that's a powerful way of building soil, because you're taking carbon that was in the atmosphere that the plant sucked out of thin air, put into its roots, causing those roots to die. That becomes soil organic matter. So multiply that by 1 million times a day if you graze,
Right.
and you could see partly why grazing is a constant root dieback event maker if it's done in a rotational way. So there's rest, disturbance, rest, disturbance. That's the key cycle. And it's really shouldn't be that far from our brains, although we don't think about ecosystems that way. But if you are an athlete or you know how to build strength in your body, it's the exact same way, right? You can't just disturb yourself. You can't just exercise. You can't just be a sloth and sit on the couch. To get strong and vigorous in our bodies, we need that. It's all about finding that balance between disturbance, stress, and rest. And what we're starting to realize is soil works the same way. The plant-soil interaction actually works the same way. And that's why people like Abe Collins and some of the soil carbon farmers and agroforestry folks are able to build soil very quickly, because it's all about managing that disturbance and rest. So this looks like, the drawing you see looks like this, and in reality now these are hazelnuts on the bottom swale here. And there's 4 swales stacked up in this part of the system. And here are some of the other earthworks, which again are foundational. The species we're growing on top of the surface of the earth is secondary. We won't even focus on it that much in this talk, although we can get into it a little bit when there's time for questions. I really want to emphasize the under layers of it. The structural layer is the earthworks and what we're doing with the water. That's the basis. What we choose for species is important, totally crucial, but it's secondary to the architecture of the system to begin with. That's how we're dealing with the water, and ultimately how we're dealing with the soil. So these are terraces, 3 terraces built with a mini excavator 2 springs ago, and then other terraces that are actually depressions, so they fill with water, so those are rice paddies, and then a really big terrace that's a big depression, which is filled with a lot of water, which is just a fish pond. So these terraces, we'll get into the rice for a second here, these terraces are formed pretty easily. Again, these would have been dug by hand. They would have taken, 20 summers to do this amount of work, or 10 summers, or, I would have had to have a lot of kids digging all summer, or me dig for 10 years, right? Give up a lot of time to dig when we have fossil fuel flowing around, very easy and cheap. I take the approach now, use it or lose it. We can use some of that diesel to create an earthwork system that's durable until the next ice sheet rolls through. So it's basically as permanent as anything we can make, more than any of our buildings. And so this is made in about an hour that's about an hour mini excavator work. They're about 10 to 14 inches deep. And then rice is like growing a long season vegetable. And just to back up for a second, I mean, how this guy gets to talk about rice all of a sudden? This whole focus here is resiliency. Why is rice? What's good about rice? What are a few things good about that?
It's incredible storage grain.
Right. So it stores. Doesn't need to be frozen. Doesn't even need a root cellar, and can store for multiple years. So even if you could get an apple or a really good potato to last a year, well, rice gets you for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 growing seasons away. So we have, at times in the past, encountered climate events where there is no growing season, or the whole growing season is compromised. 1816 was the last time that happened, a year without a summer. People would have wished they grew for, had multiple years of food stored, not just dependent hand to mouth on that current year. There was a frost every month of the year in Vermont, snowstorms through the summer. And that wasn't because of any, real dumb thing we were doing as humans at the time. That was just volcanic eruptions. That's just the Earth doing its thing. That's just the dynamic planet we're on sometimes will freeze us out every month of the year. It's going to happen again. It's a question of when. So growing a staple crop that can store for years, well, that starts looking pretty attractive. And the other big piece is we can grow it in water. It's happy to be inundated. So you can't get it too wet. If it's already flooded and liking those conditions, if it looked like that photo of the intervale, great. That's okay by rice. Rice doesn't mind that. You're just fertilizing in that situation. And the interesting thing is, from a drought perspective, you're also creating a more resilient situation because, and this is kind of the overview, one of the main points here is, by working with systems that can actually celebrate the abundance of our water, those are the same systems that can deal with drought most effectively. Because catching all the water and making the most out of it is needed for both situations. We just don't tend to think it is when there's so much water. We know it is in dry lands. Oh yeah, it's dry. We need to start mist harvesting. We need to start catching all our water, do all our rainwater harvesting. But actually it's the same strategy in really wet places, not chunking the water off the slope. So we can store the water in essentially stormwater detention basins, wetlands, that are edible. And that's all rice paddies really are. They're edible stormwater detention basins. We know we need those in the landscape. We know we need wetlands. We know we used to have wetlands all over before the beavers were hunted in Vermont. We had these buffers, all these shock absorbers, lining our valleys. From even the high elevations, beavers were active. All the way down to the rivers. So we had incredible buffering. Yeah.
Have you tried the Chinese pairing of carp or fish with the Zola?
Not yet, but that's one of the ways the system needs to develop. Absolutely. We're doing it with ducks right now. But yes, so stacking these systems and not, performing with them as a monoculture is key. But we're just babies learning how to crawl here. So we're just realizing, wow, okay, we can grow rice. Now, how do we grow rice? How do we grow it really well? That's the next 5-10 years. And maybe, my kids will know how to grow it well from a young age. Whereas maybe by the time I'm 60, I'll know some strategies about it here in this climate. This is planting the rice. This is when the rice starts to put on seed. There's just a life cycle. It's just an annual plant. It's like growing onions. It takes a long season, so we start it in a cold frame right now. But if we start getting breeding work done on rice, surely an institution like Cornell could produce inside of 5 or 10 years an even shorter year, an even shorter season crop seed than we have available to us now from northern Japan. So crucial work that needs to happen. The plant breeding end, we shouldn't stop just because we've got, let's say, 100 species of vegetables off the local organic farm, which is the benefit of amateur breeders the world over for thousands of years. That process needs to happen from a food security and resiliency standpoint, especially with staple crops like rice. This is what it looks like when it starts to put on its seed heads. Those are the constructed wetlands there with the rice in them, filling out towards the end of the season, and that's what it starts looking like when it's mature. And all the rice, it's amazing, at the Hunger Mountain Co-op down the road that feeds a good bit of this town anyway, all the rice that they sell in a year can be grown on 6 acres. They sell 30,000 pounds of rice. You can get 5,000 pounds an acre, organically. We can probably get more than that on a small scale when it's really intensive. Yeah.
So in the Asian paddy systems, they're very particular about flooding it at certain times in the life cycle of the plant, not flooding it at other times.
Right.
Does that stuff matter, or can we be...
We have 2 paddies, and we're trying different water management strategies to see how much, because you read there's a lot of ideas in paper. Yeah. And there's a lot of recommendations by the FAO and different institutions. around the world that you have to do it this way. We're finding that the crop, it's a grass, it's incredibly tolerant of conditions. You don't need to flood it at all, it still will produce. We're measuring yields. Well, what's the most production? But what we're finding so far is if you keep the weed pressure down, which doesn't need constant flooding, the yields seem similar. But we're just 3 years into the research. But certainly, one amazing answer to that question is no, absolutely not does it have to keep being flooded or keep rising the water level, which is what the folks down in Putney who've been growing it for a while, at least when I was down there 2 years ago, they were adamant you got to raise the water level through the whole season. Well, maybe you get better yields, although we're not seeing those results. We're seeing just as good yields, not flooding at all. But say you don't have a big reservoir to pull from, or the climate doesn't happen to do the flooding for you. Can you still grow rice just kind of with what the climate happens to do? And the answer is certainly yes. It can grow in your vegetable garden, but it's just hard to keep, it's hard to get as much nourishment to it as you can via water as a delivery system.
What about the other way around? If you're near a wetland and it's going to be wet through almost the entire growing season?
It can be great, but getting the rice going can be a challenge. You know, it's got to be very shallow to start the rice. So we start them in seed trays. Although one of our clients who we built a rice paddy for in Barnard, I ran out of seedlings that I was growing for him. So I said, you know what, just take an experiment we've been meaning to do. Take some rice seed, unhulled, which is what's in this photo, and just broadcast it on the part of the paddy that we didn't make you enough seedlings for. And he's told me a month ago, he said, you're never going to believe this. Those plants look better than the seedlings that we nursed for a month. And I said, I better come down and see, because if that's true, that's a complete game changer. If we can broadcast rice like they do in the tropics into paddies, well, then we can plant 1,000 acres, like nothing. Right now, we're limited by you got to plant it like a vegetable. Well, I'm not going to plant more than something the size of this room, maybe, at the home scale. And I went down there a week and a half ago, and they look better. They're really behind. They need another 2-3 weeks to finish. But if things warm up, it's possible. Essentially, broadcasting rice like most of the world grows it, if that's possible in Vermont, well, yeah, your average dairy farm has 6 acres of wasted, highly nutrified soil that can feed 5 Hunger Mountain co-ops. So we can start raising animals. We can start using this as a fodder crop. The implications are enormous.
I have a
Complete, yeah.
Can you go a little bit farther out from the screen so that I can see your photographs?
I can. The thing is, I have to click the button here. Yeah, there's somewhere over on that side. So the challenge to rice, in part, that we're running into is the processing. Right? It's very hard to get these hulls off. We did it for the first meal a year ago by hand with a roller. You're not going to do that. You're going to be hungry doing that. So I happened to find a dehuller in a barn in southern Vermont, which is just totally weird because there's no rice dehullers anywhere within 1,000 miles of Vermont. Somehow it was in someone's barn. He said, well, you're not going to want that all the piece of equipment for dehulling rice. No one grows rice around here. I said, well, actually, we do. I'll take it. He's like, oh yeah, it's yours if you want it. $200. So, which is weird. It's straight from Japan. It's a home scale, community scale, hand powered rice dehuller. It's made in Osaka. So those are all over the world, but they do not exist on this continent, except one in Athens that we now have in Moretown. So this is available for community processing, and it works fantastic. You pour the hull, the rice with the hulls in it. You get a serious rowing motion going, and this is what it comes out after a couple cycles. Looks like the bulk department at the co-op. It's kind of amazing. It's like, wow, that's what rice is. So again, fantastic crop, a game changer by itself in our food system. Just from a climate change adaptable standpoint, even if the yield was 1,000 pounds an acre, a fifth of what it is, we have to start pursuing rice as an option. But it's 5,000 pounds an acre. So it's good. There's gifts coming our way at important times when we need quickly to create some options for durable systems. Some other strategies I'll just touch on really fast here is getting other yields from beat-up old hillsides, which is the legacy we've inherited. How do we farm sloping lands of subsoil? Right. That's the challenge we have in Vermont. Mushrooms. Mushroom is like a plant that doesn't need soil. It just needs woody debris. So fungi is the wood as plants are the soil. We have plenty of low-value woody debris lying around. You can get 30% of shiitake as protein. incredibly nutrient-dense rich crop. It's not a staple crop, so it's opposite of rice. It's on the other end of the spectrum. But I put out there that we need staples. We need durable staples that can store for years in our larder, in our landscape, and then we need nutrient-dense crops as well. We need to pair those two things together, right? Because we can't just, being fed's one thing, staying healthy is a whole nother, right? As we saw what's going on, tar sands, fracking, nuclear mayhem, whatever it is, all of the tinkering, the little kid tinkering we're doing is toxifying our atmosphere. So staying healthy may be actually harder than being fed. So it's those two things, staples and nutrient-dense, really colorful fruits and fungi is probably a simplistic way to put it. Colorful fruits and fungi. That's the other end of it. That's part of the spectrum. These are wine caps, which grow in mulch and full soil. You can grow these as an understory under your kale, for instance. I once had a crop of kale and underneath a crop of mushrooms because I had mulched that bed originally as a sheet mulch project.
What are they called again?
They're called wine caps Stropharia. And they're just like this. I didn't even intend to grow these. It's one of these examples of doing what John Todd, the ecological designer, has popularized very well, was just seed the ecosystem with diversity. Just get organisms out there. It will figure out. It will self-organize. We root dipped all of our bare root plants. Everything we plant's bare root in a whole biological cocktail of different organisms, a la John Todd. One of those organisms was Stropharia rugosa, was this edible mushroom I had never even seen before. And then that summer we started seeing these mushrooms everywhere. A friend of mine who's pretty good with fungi said, "What are you doing? Why don't you harvest all those wine caps you got going? How'd you get those, by the way?" I said, "I didn't even know what they were. We just are throwing organisms at the place and food's starting to come out everywhere."
Do you inoculate with mycorrhizal fungi?
Yeah, always, exactly. So that's one of the inoculants in our root dip, and we inoculate when we sheet mulch and everything. Yeah. So promoting mycelium in the system is a very important arm of resiliency in food systems. Like, if we don't have mycelial networks in our soils aren't as resilient. They can't cope to stress and change as well as they can with healthy fungal networks. So that's what Allison brings up when she says, do you inoculate with mycelium, with mycorrhizal? Those are the fungi that live in cahoots, in synergy with the plant roots, in the rhizosphere and the root sphere of the plants. And that we're starting to realize is a huge piece of the soil food web, of the health of soil, to stay healthy and actually cope with stress and drought and flood in amazing ways.
You spoke of sheet mulching. Do you use straw or wood chips or
anything we can get? All of the above.
Doesn't make any difference.
No, the wine cap can grow in all that. It's a very generalized. It's a generalist in a big way. We also have success with oyster mushrooms on poplar, but we don't put much effort into it. Did you have a question?
Yeah, where did you get the fungi?
You can buy the inoculants from like Field and Forest Products, and then once you get it going on a site, like you have storehouses of it. It's just like a mother plant you're pulling from, like an apple you're constantly pulling cyanwood from, graftings off of, or so you can nurse it along and then take basically cuttings from it, take pieces of mycelium. I'll walk around and see areas under fruit trees that are loaded with mulch and sawdust and shavings, and if it's really white and full of mycelium, I'll divide that and then put it in areas where there's fresh woody debris that I just put down to seed that with more mycelium, and eventually you run with the mycelium that way, you start having this stuff everywhere. I get now wine caps coming up in my yard, like in what I graze. It's never been mulched. Areas that are 50 or 100 feet from any woody debris I've ever put down, it's in the soil. That mycelium network is actually spreading across the site. Probably doing a lot more than we even realize. Morels, it's hard to cultivate morels. We did one year just to see, but they never came back. There's a sheet mulching example. Catching nutrients, I would be remiss to at least not mention it. Human piss right there, urine, right? One of the most valuable liquid gold, right? If we're flushing this stuff down the toilet in drinking water, well, that's a certain level of resiliency. And that's pretty much what we do 99.9, maybe 99% of the time. So keeping these nutrients on site, feeding plants directly with watered down urine. If you want to grow a lot of food, it's the easiest way to do it. It's the easiest fertilizer. It's perfect fertilizer for plants. Saving our nutrients. This is a composting toilet we installed recently. So that's just basic stuff. We just, things we have to do. And very easy things to do, low-hanging fruit. Building resilient infrastructure, and no, it doesn't look like a food system, but it is a food system. A barn, a building, you can process this. We need to process foods. So kitchens, processing centers, barns, storage facilities, root cellars. These are all part of resilient food systems. Building them to last out of stone or very high-quality construction methods are key. That's just as key as planting. That's like the corollary. Putting a slate roof on a building where you process food is a corollary of planting an oak or chestnut, right? You need both of those systems to be built to last if they're going to be resilient. If we're not constantly rebuilding them and spending all our time like fixing stuff and actually getting yields. And then there's a lot of, I guess more technical things that are emerging on the radar, ways of bolstering ecosystem resiliency, thus food system resiliency, like foliar feeding that's just come out recently. We never had hand sprayers until recently in human history. Well, we're realizing if you go spray aerobic compost tea or even just nutrients onto the leaf stomata when they're open in the early morning or late evening, it's like an IV drip for a plant. You can feed them directly through their leaves. So even in poor soil, you can get trees established that otherwise you wouldn't be able to establish in a really harsh site. By feeding them directly, literally, IV drip for the tree. Once the tree's established, then you don't need to do that anymore. The tree starts building soil. You start making the site actually have good soil. You start to have food systems where you never could have gotten food systems before, all with the help of just a little bit of technology here. And any nutrients like I showed in the slide earlier. Urine is a great one for foliar feeding. We're experimenting with a lot of lesser, strategies. Well, a lot of these strategies are lesser known, but some are not even being tried at all, as far as we know in Vermont. Fire is one of them. Fire has been a management tool, even in this part of the world, probably for thousands of years. It's not a management tool in our toolbox right now, agriculturally. We don't think of burning fields ever. And I'm not saying it can't be applied poorly. All of this stuff can be applied poorly. Grazing, great way to destroy land, great way to regenerate land. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Same with fire. So we're actually working on trying to change sod compositions with burning. You can only burn for a very short part of the year, and not even every year. That's the challenge. You just can't burn. You can't get things to catch on fire for very much of the year in this climate. It's just too damn wet, which is a good thing. But this fire is processing this biomass, which is on a contour, very quickly. Mushrooms is another way. It's kind of the opposite, right? When you need aridity for fire to process, you need moisture for fungi to process. There are two ways of processing the same material. Generally, I think fungi is probably more regenerative, but fire can be quick. It can give you biochar, which is a whole other strategy in itself, which there's not time to get into, but is worth mentioning. Then animal systems, of course. Baseline of this system, that's one thing I realized when I got back from New Zealand, is I realized that Vermont has the best conditions for pasture of anywhere in the world, basically, besides probably Great Britain. Because of our constant rainfall, we have perfect, and average temperatures, 45 degrees. Like today is this is an average day in Vermont. I know it's a little bit depressing for some, but this is more often than not, these are our conditions, right? It's raining or just did rain or is about to rain, and it's 50 degrees. Grass loves those conditions. Right? Most other things are not thriving in those conditions, except maybe some kale or spinach. But grass is the growing season for grazers is 10, 11 months of the year. So we don't have a 6-month growing season when we're raising animals. And keeping those animals alive is the job of this little dog up here. Sorry to put her in some of these slideshows because she's a big part of the food system. Dogs are an important part of the food system if we want to keep things alive from predation. So we've experimented with all various animal systems. We're really just in the first few years of intensive rotational grazing and using animals, but the impact is incredible. We're using sheep especially now. Ducks are very successful for us because we're really trying to figure out how to farm water. That's a baseline. Ducks are a water-adapted animal more than almost anything. I mean, they don't call them waterfowl for nothing. It's incredible. They are much more comfortable in the water than they are on land. They need water to be healthy, and when they get in water, they start manuring. It's just what they do. So you can actually capture, if you think about it, an animal that wants to crap in water is a challenge if you just let those animals willy-nilly in your ponds, which we don't. We generally keep them out of our swimming ponds and our fish ponds because we don't need more nutrients. But what we do is surgically allow them into certain areas, certain duck ponds. So the water from this pond will then siphon into a little pool that has, let's say, 50 or 100 gallons of water. That then is a separate hydrological system of the water that goes from this pond to the next pond that's raising animals, it's raising fish. That goes to plants. And on its way, we let animals into the water. So if you think about it, that's a fertigation system. You're fertilizing and irrigating in one fell swoop when nutrients get in water. So in general, putting nutrients in water is a bad idea, but only if our water is doing what our water does for the most part, which is run off the roads into the Winooski, into Lake Champlain. If we're keeping our water, then it's fertilizer. So the water we want from this pond goes into that 50-gallon duck pool. We let the ducks in. They crap it up. We can pour urine in it. We can take bedding from the chicken house, throw it in this pool, make all this manure tea, essentially, and then siphon that water into the rice paddies, which is a heavy feeding grass. And do it only when it's not raining much, so it's not overflowing. So none of it overflows. So it's all just stored. All goes into rice. All goes into soil building. So the fertigation piece is actually probably the biggest piece in a lot of these systems. Growing rice is exciting, but it's not as exciting as paddies. It's the paddy structure that's the exciting part. The fact that we can actually absorb our nutrients and grow in an absorbing, accumulating type of system. That's the reverse of an entropy system where everything's leaving the site. Rice is just the crop we know of. We can grow in that really well. But a huge question that we need to put 100 PhD or master's students on right now is what else can we grow in paddies? Watercress, I don't know. What systems, what plants can we grow in paddies? Because growing in depressions, in essentially stormwater absorbing systems is what we have to figure out how to do. Rice is the logical answer, but there's other plants, and we need to pursue them.
So it sounds like you've got some kinds of structures that fairly finely tune the flows of your water?
Yeah.
What kinds of structures?
Well, they're as simple as hand-dug ditches that you can fill in with a shovel of clay and then divert one way, or half-inch poly tubing. So that's all the siphoning I just spoke of is just done with laying a tube down that's filled with water and then it starts moving, just siphoning. And when you get it going, you don't need to even, put your mouth on it to get the siphon going because you just, attach it to a fence up high and it's already got the water in it and you just lower it and you're moving water. No moving parts.
Permanent structures or moving parts.
No electricity. It's all great, and that's the beauty of slope. So if you work with slope and water together, you have all that potential energy. The hydrologic cycles already put the water up in the mountain to begin with, so we're just working with it on the way down. Slowing it and infiltrating it and feeding into plants wherever possible. So the intensive rotational grazing, of course, is a big piece. This is what pastures want to look like when you bring animals into it. They don't want to be low. They want to be high. They want to be thick with a sward of grass, with a diversity of grasses. And they want to get raised down in an intense event, high stock densities, quick timings. That's how the Midwest soils were built, the best soils in the world, basically, by giant herds of moving animals. Huge disturbances, but disturbances only happen once or twice a year. So right now...